Everyone's calling it simple. A clean Ferrari. A basic car to adapt to the new rules. But what Ferrari just revealed in Fiorano doesn't match the headlines. Because behind that minimalistic launch, behind the elegant white paint, there's a design decision that's making engineers and rivals nervous. Not because of what's there, but because of what's missing. This wasn't just a first rollout. It was a message. And if what we're hearing is true, the real threat of the SF26 isn't its speed. It's how quietly it's hiding what comes next. Because the simplest Ferrari in years might also be the one no one's prepared for. Ferrari's official presentation of the SF26 was everything you'd expect, carefully controlled, tightly edited, and filled with statements about clean philosophy, baseline concepts, and clarity. The word that kept coming up? Basic. A car designed to be neutral, versatile, and focused on adaptability for 2026. That's the narrative. That's the phrase that's now everywhere in the press. But the question is, why? Why would Ferrari, in the most disruptive regulation shift in over a decade, bring out a car that looks, on the surface, almost underdeveloped? The team emphasized that the SF26 wasn't meant to break lap records on day one. They spoke of mileage, data collection, and foundational testing. No experiments. No radical floor. No winglets, no aggressive venting, not even visible side pod disruption. It looked restrained. But that's the part that didn't sit right with people watching trackside. Because Ferrari doesn't do minimal unless they're hiding something. And this wasn't just a car stripped down for efficiency. It was stripped down intentionally. No exaggerated cooling. No exposed packaging tricks. Just a shell and silence. Even the testing session felt more like a formality than a performance indicator. 3 laps. Short runs. Shut down early. No radio. No data sheets released. Ferrari didn't let the car speak. They let the narrative speak. They told the world, don't expect anything revolutionary. But when has Ferrari ever made that kind of disclaimer, unless they had something to hide? And the more you look at the SF26, the clearer it becomes. This isn't just basic. It's calculated. There's a difference between being cautious and being calculated. What Ferrari rolled out at Fiorano wasn't just a basic car. It was a controlled message. Minimal downforce. Minimal commentary. Minimal data. This wasn't about hiding a bad car. It was about hiding the real one. Because inside the team, there's a growing belief that the simplified SF26 is a placeholder, a shell for something that won't be revealed until the very last moment. Not because it isn't ready, but because the real design pushes too close to the limit of what the 2026 rules allow. And that's where things get interesting. Because when teams are uncertain about how far they can go under FIA scrutiny, they don't show their hand early. They release neutral versions. Versions that test airflow, ride height, cooling efficiency, but don't reveal mechanical intent. And the SF26 checks all those boxes. Which means what we saw wasn't the final car. It was the political version, the one that won't trigger inspections, suspicions, or questions. The version that lets Ferrari collect their data, while they quietly fine-tune what they actually plan to race. That would also explain why the car wasn't pushed. Why Hamilton never went beyond a few laps. Why there was no telemetry release. And why so many of the technical briefings felt more like deflection than celebration. Because Ferrari knows exactly what they've built. And if they've learned anything from past seasons, it's that sometimes the best way to launch something extreme is to make it look basic. If what Ferrari showed was just a placeholder, then the obvious question becomes, what are they holding back? Because the SF26 that ran at Fiorano looked visually conservative. But that's not how Ferrari builds cars when they're desperate to win. Underneath that smooth bodywork, underneath that retro-inspired paint, is a power unit architecture that insiders are calling completely rewritten. This isn't just about engine mapping or cooling. It's about system logic. A shift toward centralized hybrid control that Ferrari has been refining quietly since late 2023. And here's the twist. It's not illegal. But it's so complex. It's almost impossible to audit. Which is exactly the gray zone Ferrari needs. Because when you can't see the advantage, you can't regulate it. And that's where Ferrari is starting to operate. Not in the mechanical space, but in the informational one. Telemetry encryption. Adaptive deployment windows. Load balancing algorithms that shift torque response lap to lap. These are things no team will show at a launch. Because they're not visible. And if Ferrari's holding back the full spec of their energy deployment model, then what we saw in Fiorano wasn't a step forward. It was a decoy. The real SF26, the one built for racing, won't be shown until it has to be. And by then, The system may already be too refined for anyone to catch. The grid right now is watching Ferrari, but not reacting. Not yet. Because what do you say about a car that looks safe? You assume it's exactly what it shows, conservative, unfinished, maybe even underwhelming. But that's the trap. Because if Ferrari has designed this basic version as cover for something more radical, then every team currently benchmarking the SF26 is benchmarking the wrong car. And that misdirection? That's worth more than lap time. It means Ferrari can keep developing without immediate countermeasures. It means rivals won't rush upgrades or adjust simulations. Because from the outside, it all looks harmless. That gives Ferrari something no simulator can produce. Time without pressure. And that's the rarest advantage in modern Formula One. Especially now, when every team is preparing for a convergence point in 2026. When software, packaging, and energy logic are becoming more important than raw aero. This is where Ferrari's strategy shifts the balance. Because teams like Red Bull and Mercedes aren't just racing against Ferrari's car. They're racing against Ferrari's timing. If Maranello unveils their real spec late, after the grid has committed to development directions, they could disrupt the competitive map before the first race even starts. That's the quiet chaos Ferrari is engineering. Not by showing too much, but by showing less than everyone expects. There's a reason Ferrari can run a car this minimal, without triggering panic from the FIA or the paddock. It's not just because of history. It's because of politics. Ferrari is still the only team in Formula One with a special veto embedded in their Concord agreement. A protection clause, never fully explained, that gives them unique leverage in how rules are interpreted, challenged, or delayed. No other team has that. Which means Ferrari doesn't need to reveal everything early. They don't need to play the same transparency game that Mercedes or Red Bull do. Because the rules aren't applied to them the same way. If they push something radical, a packaging trick, a deployment loop, even a software abstraction, they can stall scrutiny longer than any other outfit on the grid. That's why their so-called basic launch isn't a sign of weakness. It's a shield. A way to run quietly under the radar. Until the technical briefing windows close. And the FIA can't legally request changes without triggering internal disputes. And this isn't speculation. We've seen this before. Ferrari's 2019 engine loophole, the one that was never publicly explained, was settled behind closed doors. No penalties. No documents. Just a private agreement. And the paddock hasn't forgotten. So when they see a quiet, carefully neutral SF26, they don't ask what it's missing. They ask what Ferrari is planning. And how long they've had the FIA's silence to perfect it. The irony of all this? The SF26 will go down as one of Ferrari's cleanest launches in years. No fireworks. No bold claims. Just 3 laps and a quiet message. But maybe that message was never meant for fans. Maybe it was for the rest of the grid. Because if Ferrari has truly built something radical beneath this neutral shell, then they've just redefined the value of not being seen. For years, transparency was treated as a performance metric. Show the car. Prove it works. Make your rivals react. Now, silence is strategy. And Ferrari has mastered it. What's concerning is that no one, not Mercedes, not Red Bull, not the FIA, knows exactly where this car will end up. Because the SF26 isn't chasing lap times yet. It's chasing ambiguity. It's training its systems. It's watching how far it can go without being noticed. And when the real car emerges, the final spec, the full deployment, the system without limits, it won't look basic anymore. It'll look inevitable. Which is why the quiet launch in Fiorano might not be the start of Ferrari's 2026 campaign, but the last moment anyone outside Maranello had a clear look at what's coming. Because if this version of the SF26 is the one they're willing to show, the question isn't what's missing. It's how much longer they can hide what's already there. And by the time anyone figures it out, it may already be too late to stop it.